All right, good morning, everyone. I would like to call the recommending committee meeting to order January 13th, 2020 at 10 a.m. Item number 2 is, are we in compliance with the open meeting law? As usual, we are. Thank you. Item number 3. All right, item number 3 is bill number 2019-50 for possible action, amends LVMC Chapter 6.60 to update the process and standards for making available additional pawnbroker licenses based on population increase, including the authorization to conduct auctions related to the availability of new licenses. This is proposed by City Manager Scott Adams. So who is going to do a presentation on this?
Good morning, members of the committee. For the record, Mary McElhone, Deputy Planning Director. With this amendment, this amends our pawnbroker license for business licensing. The existing process in which someone obtains a pawnbroker license is through a lottery. So this would replace it with an actual auction, and it also allows for one new pawnbroker license. Currently, we have 24, and this would allow for a 25th pawnbroker license with the passage of this ordinance. Thank you.
So if this passes, what would happen? Then we would have an auction here pretty quickly and pass that one out?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's exactly what would happen. So right now, the way the code reads is that with an increase of 50,000 residents to the city of Las Vegas, a new pawnbroker license may become available. So with the passage of this ordinance, we would go through the process of allowing a new pawnbroker license, and instead of using the old lottery, which was in place, we would go through that live auction or an auction with sealed bids. There would be an opening bid of $60,000, and we would hire either a private auction company, or we would handle that also through sealed bids. There is a process that would be in place where full payment would be required within 72 hours of the auction. If they failed to pay at that time, we would go to the second highest bidder, and thereafter, if that fell through, that would terminate the auction, and we'd have to have another auction. So within 1 year, the auction winner must apply for a business license and complete a favorable suitability investigation. So this is still a privileged license. They have to obtain all the necessary land use approvals and get final licensing approval before City Council. And City Council may extend that for beyond that 1 year period. And the winning bid would function as the origination fee. So if the business license is denied or not completed, basically the auction winner would get their deposit back from that day of the auction, and we would move forward with another auction. So once this is passed, we have already done a business impact solicitation on this. We would move forward with a new license that would be eligible for auction. Thank you.
Were there any comments on the business impact statement during that process?
Chair Jeff Dorkek, Deputy City Attorney. I believe we received 2 written pieces of feedback from larger pawnbrokers who did not want the auction situation. And previously we had been told by staff that this was somewhat expected because an auction, we believe, is going to lead to the origination fee ultimately being higher because you're having an open market auction versus a flat set fee of a much smaller amount.
Okay. This is a public hearing. Anyone want to speak on this particular ordinance? All right, I'll close public hearing. Any comments up here? Anything?
I just had a quick question on how does this process relate to Clark County or North Las Vegas or Henderson, just out of curiosity?
Councilman Knudsen, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure how this does relate to Clark County. I do know that this, the process of moving from a lottery to an auction is not a new idea. This is a concept that a lot of jurisdictions across the United States actually do with their liquor licenses. They actually auction them off.
Mr. Chairman, Tom Perigo, to Councilman Knutson, the other jurisdictions don't have an auction, we know that much, but precisely what their procedure is, we don't have all of that information.
Any other questions, comments, motions?
Yeah, motion to approve. Motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion to recommend this ordinance to the city council. Go and vote. Motion carries. This will be heard at the February 5th, 2020 city council meeting. Next item is item number 4, bill number 2019-51 for possible action, amends the Unified Development Code, specifically LVMC 19.16.010, to add provisions regarding neighborhood meetings, including mandatory meetings for certain types of applications, such as general plan amendments regarding land use and applications to repurpose certain golf courses and open spaces. Sponsored by Councilwoman Seaman. Go right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, so this amendment is meant to be a companion item to the bill that is going to be before the city council on Wednesday. That amendment item is to repeal the open space and golf course repurposing ordinance. One element of that ordinance was a requirement for a neighborhood meeting. The councilwoman, in hearing from constituents and members of the council, asked that staff look at how we could include a neighborhood meeting requirement if the repeal was to go forward. So this bill that's before you creates that place for where that neighborhood meeting requirement would go. Under our current code, we have some neighborhood meeting requirements, but they're kind of scattered in a few places. So this amendment that's before you today would organize our neighborhood meeting provisions and add to those existing provisions a requirement that should a open space or golf course repurposing be proposed in the future, that as a part of its application process, just like a general plan amendment, they would also be required to do a neighborhood meeting. And spells out what those procedural requirements are. With that, any questions?
Yeah, so let me, so we're going to vote on Wednesday whether to repeal the ordinance. So that'll obviously go up or down. So if that repeal fails, then this ordinance wouldn't matter, is that correct?
This ordinance would be a little bit redundant in that there's already a neighborhood meeting requirement in the existing ordinance for those repurposing. There's some, again, there's some cosmetic structural things that we move some stuff around to accommodate this ordinance that aren't necessarily substantive. So it could move forward, but yeah, I would expect that if the repeal fails on Wednesday, and this bill is also eligible for adoption on Wednesday as well, based on recommending, moving it out of recommending committee today. But if the repeal were to fail, I would imagine that the councilwoman would be, I'll look to the city attorney. My recommendation would probably be to strike this one because
Right.
it would create some inconsistencies at that point. And so this bill should not move forward if the repeal is defeated on Wednesday.
So if the repeal passes, then that ordinance is repealed, and what this does is puts the neighborhood meeting section of the repeal back into the ordinance.
Yes, sir. So it would maintain that requirement that there be a neighborhood meeting as a part of any project that would come forward and request a repurposing of an open space or a golf course that meets the criteria.
So what would be, then what would be removed from if the ordinance is repealed, what then is actually repealed when it comes to open spaces and golf courses?
So if,
Neighborhood meeting would not, based on this ordinance. What is actually removed?
so the repeal will remove the additional development standard requirements that exist for an open space repurposing. It would eliminate in addition to, as a part of the public engagement program, in addition to the required neighborhood meeting, there are some other elements that are outlined in there that are optional things that someone could do, like a design workshop and some other things like that. As a part
I'm
of...
talking about the mandatory stuff.
Okay, the mandatory part. So if there would no longer be a requirement for the alternatives statement, which is basically just saying, what would you have done if you didn't choose to do whatever project you're proposing to do? There would not be the environmental worksheet that is required. Under the development standards, they would not be doing the conceptual studies at time of application. They would do those prior to permitting, just like we would do on any other type of development within the city. They wouldn't be doing the maintenance closure plan. Again, they would be held to maintenance requirements just like any other property in the city, but they would not do that additional documentation of the major maintenance closure plan. In terms of requirements under the repurposing ordinance, if you do a repurposing of a certain size, you're required to do a development agreement. If with the repeal, the development agreement requirement would go away, however, that would remain an option, as it is currently for any other development in the city, to do a development agreement if they so chose, which is essentially a contract between the city and the developer that establishes what the development requirements and parameters would be for the proposed development, sort of like Sky Canyon or Providence or Summerlin for that matter. I'm trying to think. Those are really the requirements that are a part of the open space ordinance itself. All of those would go away, and then this ordinance would put back into our code a requirement for a neighborhood meeting. The difference between the requirement that's put in under this ordinance versus what's in the current ordinance that's in place is under the current ordinance, the neighborhood meeting is to be held prior to the actual submittal of an application. Under the ordinance that's before this body today, the neighborhood meeting would follow the same rules that all of our other required neighborhood meetings are, which is you submit your application for your entitlement, then you hold a neighborhood meeting between the time you submit that application and before you go to your public hearing at Planning Commission to allow the community to talk about and find out about your project prior to the public hearing.
Okay, that's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Chair, if I might for a second.
Sure.
Jeff Dorkek, Deputy City Attorney. Robert, are we doing the proposed First Amendment on this one? I apologize, yes. So there was a slight tweak, I believe it's related to the definition. I'm looking at you, Jeff, that we tweaked the language. Again, it's not a substantive change. It's just for clarification purposes. I believe we did make that as a proposed First Amendment in this bill. Correct, Chair. In the backup to this bill on the recommending committee agenda is a proposed First Amendment from our office, just to make clear that the neighborhood meetings would apply to any general plan amendment. So everything that Robert said today obviously is continue to be true, but we just wanted to clarify that the neighborhood meetings are applying to a wide range of amendments.
Okay. Okay, this is a public hearing. Anyone from the public wish to speak on this particular ordinance? Come on up. I have 1, 2. Anybody else? Just 2 people? Okay, go right ahead.
Good morning, thank you.
Please state your name.
Ann Smith, 653 Revelle Court in Queensridge. So I've been listening to what's been proposed today, but what I'm hearing with this bill is that there's really only one neighborhood meeting, which just looking at the definition, I'm not clear whether it even applies to Badlands and Queensridge. I'm not sure that we qualify for that mandatory meeting and that it might be voluntary. So that's my one question. And it seems to be the only item that's saved from the open space ordinance, as we call it, shall we say, that's in place right now, that, you know, like you said, you're planning to repeal it on or vote on repealing it on Wednesday. So my feedback is, what happened, we're going back to the same old code with one extra meeting, and that's what happened to us over the last 4 or 5 years was under that code. So under that code, we had no closure plan. So Badlands is, you know, we all know it's become a desert again, but it's the devastation that's on it, not just going back to natural ground. It's what's been happening with all the cutting of the trees and the strategic placing of them to blight all the surrounding properties so that nobody coming in wants to be interested in that area anymore. And that appears to be deliberate. And the security is not there anymore for that property. So the fences are down. It's open access to anybody, so that it puts us in more vulnerability to crime and also people just wandering in and out. And we've had cars doing, you know, racing around the golf course because there's no blocking of the access to vehicles. So it's not safe. And that was because of the old code, which there's a proposal to go back to. So we don't have anything to protect that area at all and ours. So our question really for you and consideration, obviously for Wednesday, but this is the place where we're supposed to give the input, is that open space ordinance has not been given a chance to work at all. I mean, there's been no other development come in at the time that it's been applied to. So the only thing that you're providing now that's different or slightly different is one mandatory meeting onto the code. And what we experienced with that in 2016 was it was a dog and pony show, and we were told what was going to happen. Nobody took any input down. And especially now I hear that it's going to be after the application goes in as opposed to before the development application goes in, then, you know, it will be presented as a done deal. And so to us, that's just a green light, not for all developers anywhere in the city. So there was one town hall on this, right, which on the repeal and this one, which was held in Ward 2, but this whole ordinance applies to the entire city. So it doesn't make sense that we're not asking or making the rest of the city aware in all the other wards of what could be happening. And it just lets any developer who feels like it, not necessarily some who are pretty conscientious, what they're doing is giving them the opportunity to maximize their profit at the expense of the neighborhoods surrounding them that they're trying to develop. So, and it kind of flies in the face of your 2050 master plan, because when you had those public hearings recently in the spring and summer, the number one, and you allowed voting from the public on what were the priority goals for what the city should be focusing
Chair,
on.
can we focus on this item, please?
The number one priority was open space protection and enhancement. So I think that should be considered in what you're coming up with here.
Okay, we heard you loud and clear. Thank you for your comments. Thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Elaine Winger-Reisner, and I reside at 9811 Orient Express Court. I will echo what Ann says and not be repetitive in her points, but I do have, I have a friend that wrote an email, and I'm just going to make his points very quickly.
As long as his points are regarding this particular ordinance, not the
This-
repeal, this is about having one meeting, period. As long
Well,
as his
it is.
points, because this last town hall that the new councilwoman was so kind to participate in turned into a dog and pony show by Mr. Schreck. So if this is about this item number, great, say it. If it's not, I would appreciate that you stick to the item.
I am sticking to the item,
Okay,
ma'am.
go ahead and make your
Okay.
comments. Thanks.
It's the timing. Ann mentioned the timing, and I think that creates a problem. This replacement, it's about the neighborhood meeting, but this replacement does go hand in hand with repealing the open space ordinance. So I am just asking that you reconsider how and why the open space ordinance would get done. And then, with all due respect, I would ask who's pulling the strings? Our elected city officials or one developer? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Okay, I will close the public hearing. Can hear some comments or questions up here. The only thing I can say is I'm not ready to recommend this bill to the city council today because I still have a couple of more meetings today and tomorrow reference the repeal as well as this. So I'll wait for my vote on both the ordinances on Wednesday. So I'm not ready to make a recommendation today one way or the other, but I'll hear what you two all have to say also.
So I would recommend this go to council without recommendation today.
That's your motion?
That's my motion.
Any questions, sir?
Can we get that with the First Amendment?
We can.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion. Go ahead and vote. And post. All right, very good. Again, this will be heard on 20, January 15th. Right, okay, gotcha. All right. Okay, item number, let's see. Item number 5, citizen participation. Anyone in the public want to make a comment about anything? All right, I'll close citizen participation and recommending meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for all your participation.